Coming up on this episode of Famicom Detective Society, we ask the same questions over and over again until we can finally leave. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It feels a little bit strange. We are recording in my apartment for a change.
Yes.
And we are doing it on a couch. And so this was actually the first time that I was able to see you produce the show live and like watch your screen as it's happening.
Oh, great point.
It's a multifaceted thing. Yeah, but it was distracting because normally we're like locked into eye contact
Yeah,
pretty cold open.
which doesn't make it easier for me, by the way. There are a couple of buttons. I'm doing it live, which again, like, is I think since we started recording in person again, this is only the second time that I've been producing it live. So and like, for what reward? There's no like audience here. It's easy. It is easier this way, even when it's way harder. Speaking of things that are easier, even when they're way harder, my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. Would you like to borrow it quick before there's some kind of new Sonic game?
I know. I guess you have a year.
Well, yeah, it's true. And the Sonic Forces borrowing program will never die. It may take on other forms, but it will never die. All you gotta do is write into us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com and give us a mailing address where we can send you my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. There is a chance that you get my copy of Untitled Goose Game. This is not the Mighty Goose. I feel that now we need to clarify because there's a game called the Mighty Goose on Switch, and that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about Untitled Goose Game. You have no say in which one you get, but you can rest assured you will not get the Mighty Goose.
That's right. Another thing you can do is leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate it so much. It helps people find the show, boost our egos a little bit. And really, what more can you ask?
It's in my life, I am trying to achieve two things.
Mm-hmm.
One, boost the profile of the show, obviously.
Yeah.
Two, hope against hope that I can inflate my poor, sad ego.
Absolutely.
Just enough to get through the day.
And to think that somebody can help us do that in just one move.
Yeah.
One execution.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do.
And it's like a multi-step move. You got to like open the app. You got to find out where you can review and then, figure out, type something.
Yeah.
So it's complicated. I get it. And I thank everyone for putting in the effort.
I started using the app Overcast for podcasts. And there is no rating in Overcast. What you can do is like star something.
Okay.
And it like
that's just for you though, right?
No, it is not. That's what's so crazy about it. It it's like a recommend star. And so apparently they're like aggregating that information and collecting it. So basically what I'm saying and using it to like promote podcasts. So basically what I'm saying is if you use Overcast and you favorite our or like or star whatever it is in Overcast, let us know. I'll give you a shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. Wherever you are taking in this podcast, there is some way to show your approval of it. Just do that and let us know. Email us Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com. And we will be more than happy to give you a shout out on the show. Mark, I don't think we should dally too much longer here because we are discussing not one, but two video games today. Let's get into it. Let's discuss the Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir, and The Girl Who Stands Behind. So I felt like we were going into these games mostly clean slates, right? Like,
yeah,
having very few expectations about what the games actually were. And I personally don't have that much experience with this style of like not quite visual novel, but like borderline it is.
Yeah, it's definitely an old school adventure game.
Yeah.
And I would say that I had low expectations
Mm-hmm.
for what it would be, just because it's like a remake of a Famicom game.
Yeah. Well, and anytime you're dealing with a narrative, something that's narrative
Yeah.
heavy in a late 80s Japanese video game, right?
Right.
Like you don't have like a ton of high expectations, and you're like, there's the genuine like threat of there being something like that I hate in here, right?
Yeah, I felt kind of safe having to be Nintendo.
Sure.
Because there was, oh, by the way, we should just say upfront, um I don't know exactly how this is going to play for people who like haven't played these games,
Sure.
because like, and also we're gonna spoil the heck out of everything.
Yes.
And so, but I'm about to just start dropping names that won't necessarily make sense outside of the context of the
Right.
games, which
But
hopefully we will get to.
yeah, no, but I do think that one thing to like I think this will be a valuable episode to listen to if you are just interested in what these games are.
Yeah.
So like we are going to try to contextualize this thing as much as we can, and explain both the stories about these of these games and the actual experience of playing them.
You're right. You're
Yeah.
right. You're right. I guess basically, and I can actually do some contextualization right now.
Just as you go.
But basically, there's one character in The Girl Who Stands Behind, and he at one point is like outside of a nightclub, and like another dude has his arm around his shoulder.
Yeah.
Like you could with like a close friend.
Sure.
But also, my immediate thought was like, oh, is this character gay? Because so much has happened in these games that I otherwise would not expect from Nintendo,
Totally.
that I was like, I guess it's totally possible. It absolutely turns out that he is not.
Right.
But
It's categorically not. No,
but for a moment,
yeah.
I was like, I guess this could be possible in this game.
Well, because you're referring to, I think you said a moment in The Girl Who Stands Behind, which we played these games in release order. So
Mhm.
we did The Missing Heir first, and then The Girl Who Stands Behind after. And the Missing Heir, and we mentioned this in a previous episode, kind of pulls no punches where it's like violence is concerned,
Yeah.
right? Like the first victim, the first murder victim, who you are hired to investigate, dies of poison, or I guess it's not clear immediately that's poison. This is me
Yeah.
dropping spoilers already. But then like there are several characters that die after her that are stabbed or hanged, ultimately all poisoned as well. But like you see someone hanging from a tree.
Yeah.
You see a bloated
It's pretty
corpse with a
grim.
knife sticking out.
There's like the guy who is like shoved into another person's grave.
Yeah,
you
there's
know?
also that. Yes.
And it's interesting that like in the um depiction of it, like it's like fairly graphic.
Yeah. Like not bloodless,
Mhm.
certainly. And like, the game never forces you into like a Saw situation or
Right.
anything like that. And your character is very seldom in mortal peril.
Mhm.
I would say there are maybe 3 moments throughout the course of both of these games where you feel as though your character is in any danger at all. And there's no actual fail state in the game. Like you can always ask more questions to like get through it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's not. There's no fail state in the game. There's no fail state from screen to screen, really, from encounter
Yeah.
to encounter, because the way that the games are set up, for better or for worse, is like you travel to a location, and very rarely does the game let you leave that location until you have resolved whatever it wants you to do on that screen.
Yeah.
So you go to a place and you have to talk to people or just look around and pixel hunt until you unlock the information that it wants you to know, and then the option to travel will show up. There are occasions where you can jump from place to place, but it's very like narrowly defined.
Yeah.
And so like you might go someplace and you're like, I don't entirely know what I'm supposed to do here, and so head back to your original location, and usually the person at the original location will give you a hint being like, I don't have anything else to tell you, or like come back after you've like take your time, come back after you've figured out what you need to figure out, and then you're like, oh, okay, I should go back to that bar and just like click around until I figure out what I'm supposed to be doing.
Just talk to people for a while. But and this game is not without its what you mentioned like pixel hunting, and it's not quite so bad as that. Like the places that you can search on every screen are pretty broad in like finding the actual place. And generally speaking, if you like have an inquisitive mind and are like looking at things, you will just stumble on the clues that the game wants you to find. However, too frequently, and this is my main knock against this game, is that it will make you do something multiple times,
Yeah.
the same thing multiple times, where you are not getting different feedback each time, where you are getting the same sort of like, yeah, whatever, like, yeah, I don't think I should interact with that, or like, doesn't seem like this person has anything to say about this. That you have to do those things multiple times to trigger them being like, oh, you sure do ask a lot. Or there's a moment in the second game where you have a friend with you who's sort of acting as your bodyguard, and you have to look at his wig 3 times before the scene. You have to like investigate his wig and like just look at it and do it again and do it again and do it again.
Right.
3 times before he like advances the scene.
Yeah, and that's really I feel like where the game shows its age.
Yeah.
And I was actually surprised. I feel like in the impressions or kind of like reviews that I read of this before playing, that it seemed to me that a lot of people were saying that The Girl Who Stands Behind, which is the second game in the series, it like improves on that aspect of the first game. And I didn't really find that to be the case. I found like
Oh, I did.
I felt like both of them had equal amounts of just like I I'm stuck here, so I will just continue to like try every single option on here
and just try it
until
over and
something
over
like
again.
triggers. Yeah.
There was a point, maybe like halfway through the missing Heir, where I pulled up a walkthrough, so that when I would get to a point where I was like, I honestly don't know what to do
Yeah.
here, that I would just look and be like, oh, guess I had to call for this person 3 times before like I can move on to the. Or
Yeah.
like there are one point in each of these games where you have to try to quit the investigation, which prompts you to save your game. But twice it makes you do that to just make the game happen. And to The Girl Who Stands Behind's credit, it does like highlight the option in yellow when it's like going to do something special.
Yeah.
If I could change just one thing about this game, it would be when you are definitely not going to get any new information for asking someone about something, that they would just gray it out. That you just couldn't ask about Yoko anymore.
I know.
Because they don't know Yoko.
I mean, I guess if you want to be really generous, we could say that that is true to life to detecting, right?
Yes.
Is you just have to be like if you're a private detective, you're just like a dog with a bone, and you're just gonna keep asking that bone questions until it finally like changes the information.
Which is the Columbo approach, right? Like it is
Right.
like just
like
keep
one more
going.
thing, yeah.
You know something, I just can't shake. I start thinking about things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you are right, of course, and like part of the game experience, I think, is that frustrating time where you're like, man, I just can't, because you also experience the opposite, right? You do experience genuine moments of like, I know what this guy knows about, and like I'm just gonna ask him about these things.
Totally.
And sometimes the game just sings, but it's not all the time.
You know, that is a good point, because I was saying that I didn't feel like the second game improved on stuff, on like some of those frustrations a lot. But one thing I do wonder is I played these games pretty much back to back.
Yeah, me too.
And so part of it was like, I can't tell if The Girl Who Stands Behind improved on that kind of stuff, or if I just got better at playing the game. Like, you know, like after going through the missing Heir, I understood the mechanics a little bit better. So it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not gonna like the game is kind of, and yeah, maybe it is a combination of both, because like I do feel like The Girl Who Stands Behind, the dialogue did a better job of like kind of directing you sometimes on what you should be asking people and what like you don't have to worry about. But but again, every time I was stuck, I was like, well, there's no reason that this person is going to know about like said character, but I guess I'm just gonna ask them or like show them this thing anyways, because they will be like, oh, I forgot, I did know this person after asking them like 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah, there's also maybe that's also just written into the characters in the games. Like I'm just sort of thinking about this now, that in the missing Heir, you spend most of your time with a family, and the matriarch has been killed or is dead, and you have to figure out what happened. And so everyone is lying to you, but no one is really suspicious.
Right.
Whereas in The Girl Who Stands Behind, um, a lot of people aren't lying to you, but everyone is suspicious.
Yeah, and in The Girl Who Stands Behind, like, the whole game, I feel like, is predicated on people just withholding information for you
Yeah.
for no particularly good reason until, like, late like, you come back 2 hours later, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna tell you about this thing finally."
Yeah. Well, and both of these games I feel like are slow to so these games were originally released on two separate discs each. And like at separate times, right? So they were like episodic. And you can feel that like as you're playing that like they both sort of build to like a mini climax in like the middle of the game and then sort of like refresh the story
Yeah.
like literally in the case of The Girl Who Stands Behind and sort of like represent it. I forget what I was driving towards when I started saying that. It doesn't matter. Um,
I think we should
yeah.
talk about the games separately at first,
Yes.
and because I I have no idea how many people in the world have played these games, and so maybe we should talk about each one individually because I do
Yes.
think they are like distinct experiences, and the stories hold up really well. I felt like in both, I definitely have my favorite, but yeah. So the Missing Heir, you play as a detective. Like you're a kid detective. You have graduated high school, but you're maybe like 17 or 18 years old.
And first of all, super cool.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yes.
let's more kid detective games, please.
Yeah, and no, we're not talking like Encyclopedia Brown.
No, 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 no.
No, no, no.
No, I
Um,
want this character who is Japanese but named Patrick Ellers.
oh, mine was named Ace Mitchell.
That's very
Uh,
good because they ask you for a last name
mhm.
and then a first name.
And the reason you get to input that is because the story of the first game is you wake up and you have amnesia.
You got amnesia. So you got to add one mystery to the pile. The
Mhm.
first mystery, who am I?
Right. And so somebody asks you your name, and that's when you get to like input it,
Yeah.
say like this is who I am. And one thing that's kind of cool is I think if you played The Girl Who Stands Behind first, the game asks like checks to see if you have a save file
Yeah.
for The Girl Who Stands Behind when you're playing The Missing Heir. And if you do, I assume like there's an opportunity in the Girl Who Stands Behind for you to enter your name. And so it's just like it checks either way. So if you played one
Yeah.
game, it'll just take your name from the other if you wanted to.
Yeah, and but it is a hilarious sort of because this is a game that was never localized when it was originally released, and so in its localization now, it is unapologetic in its Japanese
Yeah.
ness, and that's sort of by necessity of like the stories that are being told are very Japanese. They're very like Japanese family structures and like business structures and like values and everything. So like I am so thankful that they didn't change the Ayashiro family to like, I'll just not they're not the Mitchells,
Right. Yeah.
Um
Completely.
it's nice that the game retains like all of its Japanese flavor.
Yeah. And like in the um first in The Missing Heir, like a Shinto temple like
Yeah.
features heavily in it, and they're not like, oh, you mean this old McDonald's that is no longer, like it's still very like
Yeah.
clear what it is. And so The Missing Heir, you have fallen off of a cliff and you have amnesia. So you're trying to figure out not just like who you are, but putting the pieces together of like why you were put on this case, like all that kind of stuff. You're rescued by a man who just like lives nearby and finds you. And he,
Amachi is
yeah,
how he
Amachi.
introduces himself to you.
Yeah. And so, and you will, you interact with him like multiple times in the game. Like he offers to like have your shirt cleaned, like all this kind of like
Oh, he just
stuff.
does it.
Oh,
He just
right. He
cleans
doesn't offer. He just does it.
because you don't realize it for kind of a while, but you wake up not wearing your own shirt.
Yeah.
Um, and so like it's cool also that the where you wake up, you are at the base of a cliff that is famous for suicide.
And immediately when
Yeah.
it's like Suicide Cliff, I'm like, oh,
Oh,
okay.
okay, all right.
Like this is not,
Yeah.
like we're gonna go there.
Yeah, we're adults.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so there are a bunch of questions just sort of like hovering around in the background where you're like, why was I at the suicide cliff? Was I trying to commit suicide? Was I at the any was it an accident? Was I attacked? And so there's that sort of mystery, and then you also um come to understand that you have been hired. You work for a detective agency, and you have been hired to investigate the murder or the death of the matriarch of the Ayashiro family, Kiku Ayashiro. And so that is another mystery that you have. And then also just sort of like softly in the background, you have the third mystery of, by the way, you were also trying to investigate the whereabouts of your parents because you're an orphan.
Right.
Which, who am I? Who are my parents? Oh, and there's this murder mystery.
Yeah. And the thing that, so, okay, I thought that I liked the story of the missing heir more than I liked the story of the girl who stands behind. And I think for me, the reason I liked that is because I felt like there were so many reveals
Yes.
in the missing heir that genuinely I was like kind of like surprised by. In a way that like the girl who stands behind didn't really do that for me. And I don't really know why.
Well, I mean, there is sort of the difference in the missing heir that it makes you part of the mystery. It makes
Yeah.
your character part of the mystery.
You're invested.
Yeah, and when I say part of the mystery, it's not just the mystery of your identity or your parentage, but like you discover and like chapters ahead of the characters that you are the titular missing heir.
Right.
That your parents were connected to the Ayashiro family. In fact, is one of them. And so like all of that, builds into a moment that is like a heroic moment for you, the character. Whereas the girl who stands behind pretty much stays like within the drama of the people that you're visiting at the school, and like it's sort of nice that it's connected with Ayumi, who is your partner also in this game too, but it's still not quite the same as like you yourself being like the thing around which the whole mystery revolves.
Yeah, and they both have kind of like a supernatural twist to them. Like in the missing heir, like Kiku, the matriarch of the Ayashiro family, there's a legend
This is
around
great.
it
I love
where
this.
like she is walking around after like out of her grave
Yeah.
after her death, and to like take revenge or something like that. Like
To,
she's
like,
like
terrorize
stalking the
people, yeah.
countryside.
It's you discover the legend of the Ayashiro family as you're playing the game, and it basically comes down to that they betrayed someone or whatever, and so they have a history of raising from the grave to torment the people who tormented them. And the Ayashiro family in the modern day runs a sort of aggressive company, right? I guess
Right.
like that's
Yeah.
not criminal necessarily,
Not
but
criminal necessarily, but it sounds like Kiku's like husband
yeah.
like did things that were really bad.
Yeah.
And so
And drove multiple people to suicide.
yeah, yes.
Again, we're dealing with suicide. This game's not for babies. It's grown-ups playing these games.
And so it's like, okay, so Kiku, the villagers are convinced that she is like walking around the countryside, that she is like, because there are like multiple murders, like the bodies are piling up.
Yeah.
In the missing heir.
It's ridiculous because you are hired to investigate this thing, and then bodies, right? Like, it's like something like 5 more people are killed on your watch.
Yeah.
It's not great. It's not a good look.
And so it all like is kind of like leading to this moment where they're gonna like, okay, we're gonna actually, I mean, this is maybe the halfway point, but they're like, we're gonna excavate, we're gonna exhume Kiku's body, right? Because we need to check something, but also just to kind of like prove that yeah, she is here, like she's not up walking around. And then it turns, and her nephew, what is
Well,
his name?
her nephew's son,
Oh,
Akira.
yeah. Her nephew's son, who had been like missing for a while. When they open up Kiku's grave, his body is like stuffed into it,
And it's grotesque.
It's grotesque, but also like that was a twist that I did not see coming.
Yeah, me neither.
Like I did not expect. Maybe because I was like, I didn't expect this game to play so dirty. You know what I mean? Where it was like,
totally.
oh yeah, we're gonna like, this guy's dead. He's crammed into this like really like tiny space in this really like grotesque way. You're like, oh, okay, that's like the kind of game I'm playing. And so I really liked those kinds of twists. Like it took me by surprise. And I really appreciated that at the end of the missing heir, the game does do like a full on like first person dungeon crawler esque little like puzzle
amazing.
that you have to do. And I miss that from the girl who stands behind, because that just kind of like resolves itself through. There's no like puzzle really you have to solve at the end. It's just
Yeah.
like you just advance the story, and then the mystery reveals itself. And so I just thought all of like the surprises in the missing heir, the even though like the grand mystery of like who is the missing heir, like who is the ultimate bad guy, like I kind of saw coming. I it didn't.
I was less ahead of the game on who is the ultimate bad guy. Like I had my suspicions, but like there are enough. Like there's a little while where I was like, yeah, Akira's probably behind this. Like I feel like it does do a pretty good job of throwing you off that case. But yeah, like it becomes obvious like very early that well, like, I guess like the setup here is that Kiku has died. The butler suspects foul play because she died on the night that her will was read to her closest family. And her closest family are her two nephews and her niece, and they're all involved in the Ayashiro company except for the niece. But so they all have like a vested interest in like being the person to be the heir of the Ayashiro family fortune. Um, but there's sort of the like always hanging thing of like, but there is like Yuri, our Ayashiro is out there somewhere. This is Kiku's daughter, who would in fact be the rightful heir, but has not been at the family estate for like 20 years. And it's something that none of them want to talk about. And the two nephews, Kanji and Jiro, are hostile to you the whole time. They
Yeah.
don't want to answer your questions. And Azusa, the niece, is the same way. Like really just stonewalling you to the point where you're like, what's even the point of asking these people anything? But so when you do get to the heart of who Yuri is, she runs a. Why does she run away? She leaves.
I can't remember.
I can't remember either. She leaves the family along with a sort of like adopted brother,
Yeah.
and like just leads her own life. I guess it's enough to just not want to be part of the Ayashiro family. There may have been some other detail about it that we are just forgetting. But so like you travel to this town and you start to learn more about her life after leaving the Ayashiro family, which like that's where you start to get ahead of it because you're like, oh, this is clearly my mother. She had a baby and it was clearly me. But just sort of like putting together the dots of like how she went from being the scion of the Ayashiro
Yeah.
family to being this like outcast who dies in a fire, and like her husband killed a man in self-defense, and like he could never shake that reputation, then dies in jail. It's like there's all these like layers of tragedy. And well, it's not surprising that the end of it is like you are the orphan son of Yuri Ayashiro. It is compelling regardless.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then the other piece of it, like looming over all of this, is control of the Ayashiro family, like company.
Yeah.
And as like family members are being bumped off, it's like, okay, this lawyer who is like the family lawyer, Kanada,
Yeah, Kaneda?
Kaneda.
I think Kaneda.
Yeah.
Nope,
He
Kanada, you're right.
yeah, he like he is basically like consolidating power. And you are trying to talk to him, you're trying to reach him, but he's really difficult to reach. He has like a secretary who's like stonewalling you.
Yeah, and great game mechanic. You get his phone number early on, and at any time that you're in the house, you can star 16 to try and like call the office, and they stonewall you on the phone too. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. And so basically it turns out that Kanada is Amachi. He is the person who saved you from the cliff and who has been acting as your friend this whole time is actually like the murderer. And so that's kind of the only way that I got ahead of it. It was like economy of characters.
Sure.
Like Amachi, like you rely on him, like you go back to his place so much, he has to connect somehow.
Yeah.
And so the only piece that he could really fit into is if he's not the missing heir, which he's not because you are,
Right.
then like
Totally
he kind
obvious.
of like has to be the killer.
Okay, but I mean, economy of characters, yes. But there is also a character that rescues you, like at the last second in the game, who is the sort of adopted brother. who has gone away to become a lawyer in his own right, so he can advocate for your right to claim the inheritance. And like he comes like virtually out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like we know that he's around. We meet his fiance, who is trying to meet him at the suicide cliffs every day at 5 p.m.
Yeah, and it's like there's got to be a better way.
Don't do this here. But yeah, like when he
maybe it's Lovers Bluffs and Suicide Cliff.
maybe
So it's
maybe
like
that's
you
right.
just like roll one right into the other.
Yeah, I mean I believe it. It's a beautiful place.
It's gorgeous.
I'm glad they keep sending you back to that like that stretch of cliff.
Yeah.
Because they bring you there at different times of day. There are times where it's annoying. It's one of my least favorite there. So you travel there at one point with the family doctor, whose name is
Kumada.
Kumada.
Which he is like, this has to be on purpose because there's Kumada, who's like the doctor in this game, and he is your go-to. You talk to him a lot. Like he's kind of like your a connection to the family.
Who's also like distant enough to like speak dispassionately about them.
Yeah. And then in The Girl Who Stands Behind, there's Komada, who is basically the same character model, just like a little younger and without glasses. And so at first I was like, is this the same person? And I decided to go back and check and see like, no, the name is like slightly different.
Yeah.
But he kind of plays that same role as like adult confidant that you have in these games.
Totally. But as the Ayashiro family doctor, I thought he was going to be like that he was going to provide like medical information or something and like just give you clues. But he's such a more fleshed out character than this.
Yeah.
Because he's also kind of a horn dog, right? Like
lots of characters in both of these games are real horn dogs.
But this guy especially had a crush on Yuri,
and I thought that was going to like
I
amount
thought it was
to something.
Too. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. But when you tell him like, oh, I'm gonna go meet this woman who I think is the other brother's fiance. He's like, oh, is she attractive? And you're like, yeah, I guess she is. And he's like, I'm coming too. And so for the first time in this whole adventure, you've got someone accompanying you to the cliffs. And you know she's not there, whatever. Oh, so this was me saying you are at these cliffs and you're traveling kind of like back and forth between them and the train station, and at some point you have to come back to the cliffs, and Kaneda is nowhere to be found, but or not Kaneda, Kumada, sorry, the horny doctor, and you have to call his name 3 times, and the first 2 times you get just no response. And you just got to do it 3 times, and then like it triggers you finding another body.
Yeah.
Well,
and that there's like a whole sequence at the cliff that's really frustrating because like it's probably the nadir of both games where it's like you visit Amachi at his home, at his apartment.
Yeah.
And then you go through all the talk options, and I can't remember exactly what it is. Oh, somehow it's like, oh, you should go to the cliff to look for clues. So you go to the cliff and you can like look around, and it's like the prompt, no matter where you click, is just tells you like, like I feel like there should be something around here.
Right.
So you're like, okay, obviously I'm supposed to be clicking, but that is not what the game wants you to do. The game wants you to click around, fail, go back to Amachi, talk to Amachi until finally, like again, there's no new like prompt. It is just you have to continually hit the existing talk prompts and then ask him questions, and then finally he will reveal another piece of information, and then you go back to the cliff and you can like search and find like a new like the heel of a shoe or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like when that is your first time encountering that, because when that kind of stuff happened in The Girl Who Stands Behind, I would just be like, whatever, I'm looking this up where I'm supposed to like go because I don't want to play this game. But I
mean, you want to play the game,
I want to play the game.
You don't want to play this
like,
specific
I don't want to
game.
play the like the meta game.
Yes.
That The Girl Who Stands Behind wants me to play. But I didn't know what to do in the Missing Heir, so like I didn't look up a guide, and so it was just that was like so frustrating.
Yeah.
That part was just like so where you're just like, it is so unclear what I'm supposed to be doing that you're even after like banging every option multiple times, it's just like, just tell me, because there's a really annoying feature in both games, and I think it might be called think in both of them. I can't
Yes.
remember what it was. I can't 100%.
Remember.
Oh
It's
yeah,
called remember
in
in
the
the first
Missing
game.
Heir, it's called Remember, and then in The Girl Who Stands Behind, it's a different function called Think. But they both kind of um perform the same thing, where
They're
it's
both
just
just like introspective
yeah, where
moments.
it's
Yeah.
like, and so sometimes it does things, and but the majority of the time
Does nothing.
it just, you get a dialogue that's just like dot dot dot, and like your character makes this like sound. That is so, if I were to make one
Here we go.
improvement to both
Let's
of these
do it.
games,
Yes.
I would make the think or like remember thing like always act as some sort of like a hint or clue as to
Totally.
what you're supposed to be doing.
Totally. And then on top of that, we're just gonna keep pitching changes to the game. Um, uh, search, examine, take, and open should all be the same command. Anything that lets you just like look around the room, like I shouldn't have to examine the room and see like a telephone and then choose take and then take the telephone. Like I should just be like searching, and if I choose the telephone and I can interact with it, then I'm interacting with
It's
it.
also funny sometimes because like you can take some, you there let's say there's like a cigarette case or something.
Yeah.
And the options will show up that say, because I do think the game is fairly good at like the open or take options aren't there all the time.
Right.
They're only there when like it only appears when there is something that you can actually open or take, because that would be
But the
enormously
examine
frustrating.
is still
The
there all
examine
the
is still
time.
there, but
Yeah.
that's what's so funny is because it'll be like open, take, examine, and so you can like examine the cigarette case, or you can open the cigarette case, or you can take the cigarette case, and they all do different things, and eventually you'll do the one that it wants you to do, which is
Right.
like take it and then open it up. But all the options like become available at once. So every time even though it is great that the game will only make those appear contextually, it's still like unclear which one you're supposed to do.
Totally. And it leads to some hilarious situations where you're like, I'm going to try to take Zenzu, the butler. And it does, of course, it's like, I don't think I should do that because it's having a hard time understanding what you mean. Okay, so Kaneda, the attorney, um, his father was one of the aforementioned suicide victims who killed himself after the shady dealings with the Ayashiro family. So that establishes his basically all he's really doing in trying to take over the Ayashiro Corporation is get revenge on them.
Yeah.
Which like distills it down to a nice, like easy, understandable revenge story. What did you think about? I mean, we sort of touched on the like first person maze at the end. I thought that was amazing. Not because like the gameplay, like it makes you do a simple little puzzle in first person like that. But just like shifting the way you are fundamentally interacting with the game, makes it feel like such an effective climax.
Yes, exactly. Made it feel like a real like end to
Yeah.
the game, where it's like, oh, okay, like it built to this moment, and now when I figure this like puzzle out, then the mystery will resolve itself. And so yeah, I thought that was really effective. I missed it in The Girl Who
Yeah.
Stands Behind. But one thing that if we want to start shifting to The Girl Who Stands Behind, oh, I guess actually two things we should mention about the Missing Heir is that you are working for a detective agency. It's like the
No, we'll get there. Hold on. It's the
Utsugi.
It's like Utsugi, maybe. Utsugi, yes,
Oh
that's
yeah,
correct.
the Utsugi like detective agency. But in the Missing Heir, you never see Detective Utsugi.
Yeah.
But the person.
So it seems like there's just two 17-year-olds working at this detective agency, which again, like more of this, please.
Yeah, and so the character that you do interact with, is Ayumi, and she is like Japanese high school dream girl.
Yep.
And she's the one who is a trophy in, I mean, yeesh, but like she's a trophy in Super Smash Brothers Ultimate.
Okay, but there are a lot of trophies in Super Smash Brothers Ultimate.
I mean, yeah, fair. Waluigi. But like he's like, she is like the it seems like all game developers and like a lot of people have a crush on this character.
I don't get that. Do you?
I don't really get it either. Because it's not like she's a well-developed character in either game. She really is just kind of like the one especially in The Girl Who Stands Behind that everybody's horny for.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and in this game, like nobody interacts with her but you. But it's
Yeah.
clear that you guys have like a close relationship.
So I wonder if that's it. I mean, also she's in both of these games,
Yeah.
which puts her in a very rare class.
But you totally. But a thing that I like a mechanic that she performs in the Missing Heir is she like at the end of every day basically you meet back with her at the detective agency and you guys just like debrief
Yeah.
essentially. And it's a really smart way for the game to just like recap the information that you've received that day and like lay it all out to be like, okay, so this is kind of how like it all fits together. Like this is what I've discovered, and this is the story so far. But in like a
And
really like
she will also introduce new information
she
too.
does
Yeah.
because she goes that you don't see, but like during the day, she's like, "Oh, I'll go check on this thing," and at the end of the day, you guys compare information, and, like figure out what it all means.
Um, two questions for you. How did you feel about the locations in this game? You spend a lot of time at the house, the Aishiro family house, and with the butler Zenzu, who I already mentioned, and the maid whose name is something.
Akane.
Yeah, Akane. And Akane's main characteristic, as far as I can tell, is that she does not want to talk to you about anything.
Everything's fine until there's like a stain on the floor, and then
and then
she's
she
just like
freaks out. And it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
I won't say anything to you.
Yeah.
But you're also in like that village that their
You're at the
manor
train
is in.
station like
Yeah.
all the time. You're at the cemetery, which has like
Mhm.
the shrine and the temple in it.
And
Um,
the like monk who keeps the temple,
mhm.
Genshin. Yeah. So how do you feel about the look? And there are also, you go to the corporate headquarters and the lawyer's office, and
Yeah.
I think
I
we've
think that's
mentioned
pretty much
most of
it.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. And you go to the detective's office at the end at every day.
And this small village where
Oh, right, right,
you
right.
were raised,
Yeah.
in the orphanage.
Misery
Yeah.
Village.
That's right.
I I think I liked in general the settings in The Missing Heir more than I liked the ones in The Girl Who Stand Behind. In The Girl Who Stands Behind, I feel like um you're staring at like a really like at a just concrete walls all the time.
You are staring at a lot of concrete walls. The locations in the Missing Air are more like kind of fanciful, but I found that I got more frustrated being in the loops that I was stuck in that game. I don't know if I just wanted like more from Zenzu, the butler.
Oh yeah.
But I feel like there are so many times where I was just like back at that house and like, oh my god, I was talking to this guy again. Or
Oh yeah, that's true.
yeah,
One part that's especially frustrating is fairly early in the game. There's like a storage area where somebody's murdered, and there's like a door in it, and everybody's like, "Oh, that door's locked. That door's locked." And then it's not until the very end of the game that you like have a key and can unlock the door. But it's just like a really when they show you, it's just a really simple lock. And from that very moment when you're like, "There's obviously something important with the like
yes.
locked door. Let's just break open the lock."
Let's just do it. Let's get in there. Let's figure out a way. Yeah, no, it's frustrating, and that is also like through that door is where this first person maze takes place.
Yeah.
And you still need to have Kiku's mirror. So this is a thing that I still couldn't really wrap my head around. Is there a supernatural element to this story, or is it? I felt the same way about the Girl Who Stands Behind. There's like a ghost story that both these games kind of dance around, and then like sort of suggest aren't real, are just like real
So
world things happening. But
yeah, like and the girl who stands behind that one is explained better. I feel like where you're like,
yeah,
oh, okay, that's actually kind of cool to see how like those why people would like think that this supernatural thing was happening. For the the Missing Heir, it's kind of just dropped. Like it's not really explained
yeah.
why the villagers. I mean, I guess other than just the fact that people continue to die, like it's not really explained why people think that Kiku is like
But they
walking around.
swear it.
Yeah,
They,
they
when
swear.
you see them at the train station,
But
they're
there
like,
is a
"I saw
mirror.
her."
There is a mirror that Akane, like the maid, put into her pocket, into Kiku's pocket, like
When they buried her.
when they buried her, because it was like her mirror, her hand mirror, and you get it somehow, and so it's like, how did this? but it must have just been
when they crammed Akira's body in
yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. That like when they were taking Kiku's body out of her grave. Because like I don't think we ever learned where Kiku's body ended up.
I
Right?
mean, this is a great question. One of the big mysteries of our time before making a sequel to the Famicom Detective Club. Where's Kiku's body?
Where's Kiku's body? But that's the thing. The Girl Who Stands Behind is not a sequel to the first game.
That's right.
It is a prequel.
Before we move on to that, my second
okay,
question.
yeah. Sorry.
Do you have a favorite character that you interact with in the Missing Heir?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because I do think that one of the things I like more in The Girl Who Stands Behind are the characters. I think that there are more interesting and funny characters in The Girl Who Stands Behind. But I actually think no, there is no character in The Missing Heir that really stands out to me as like particularly interesting or funny. I think like the train station attendant was kind of like
he's kind of funny, but you do find yourself like coming back to him a lot and just being like, this guy doesn't know anything.
I don't know. Who was your favorite character?
I liked Genshin. The monk at the cemetery. You spend a surprising amount of this game arguing with him about the fact that you need to dig up a corpse. He does not want you to do it.
It is kind of funny. It's funny because there are multiple times in the game where you have to like choose the option to like look around and you like
open the grave. You choose open and then you're like tombstone.
And he's like whoa no. And
slow your roll,
I
buddy.
do like that. Yeah, Genshin's okay. He's kind of like a cute old man.
Yeah.
He's not as horned up as everybody else. But no.
And when he's not being a horn dog, Dr. Kamada is also funny.
Yeah.
Like, because there at some point he accompanies you to the suicide cliffs. But because he's sort of gotten it in his head that he's a detective too.
That's right.
And like his braggadocio around that is pretty funny. And the fact that the nurse who like helps run his clinic is like, he's just out being a detective now. And I think this is your fault. Like, that's all very funny to me too.
Yeah. Yeah. But otherwise, there aren't that many characters who like were written that interestingly versus in The Girl Who Stands Behind, there are like multiple that I really liked a lot.
All right, so let's then shift now to talk about The Girl Who Stands Behind, which is the sequel, sort of prequel to The Missing Heir, and starts with you meeting Detective Utsugi.
Yeah, which is such a letdown because
it's so weird.
You finally meet Detective Utsugi in the flesh, and he is featured in the game multiple times, but he is not he's not a mentor. He is not helpful. He does not play an interesting role in the game, which is fine. But it's funny to me that they chose to do this like solo a Star Wars story-esque like prequel where it's like, now we're gonna see how it like all came together for Ace Mitchell. Like, who's Utsugi? Who's like, how did him and Ayumi like meet for the first time? And
which I feel like that is a satisfying story. That part of it.
I think
how they meet and solve their first crime together.
I think it is satisfying, except that I am annoyed with how Ayumi is written in this game.
Sure.
Where I am annoyed that like you spend the first half of the game being like, no, like she's like, hey, let me help figure out how my friend died, and you're like, no, I can't do that to you. Like, you're too precious and delicate.
Yeah,
your
it's not
skin
great.
is like, I mean, he doesn't like go into that, but that's like the vibe in the beginning. And she is a character of action. Like, she is not like, okay, I'll do whatever. She's like,
and she's invested because
she's
it's
invested.
The murder victim is her friend.
Right. But so I did like that. I hated that my character treated her that way, and I hated that I had no
Ace Mitchell.
I hated that I had no agency in that. I like her as a character, and I guess in this game I do understand why people like her, because she's also responsible for probably the most interesting and dynamic part in any of these two games, where you told her, no, you can't help me, and so she drugs you. She drugs you. Yeah. So you pass out, and she's like, whatever, I'm like going for it. And sure, it does leave.
It backfires on her. But we're getting ahead of ourselves now. But I want to go back to the point you were making about like, this is you meeting Utsugi. Both of these decisions are wacky, right? That in the first game, you work for a detective who's just out of town all the time. It's so weird. And then in the second game, in The Girl Who Stands Behind, you meet him And he's just like, you could be a detective with me. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, it like happens at the very beginning. I actually can't
It's
remember
like a
what.
cold open.
Yeah, it's a cool, but I can't remember like what causes you to meet him, but something does, and
Yeah, like the cops are hassling you on like a
oh, that's
campus of
right.
some
We
kind.
don't know exactly what's going on, but you're
Yeah,
like running from the cops, and you run into Utsugi, and he like talks to the cops and is like, "Don't worry, like I like will take care of him. I'll make sure he like stays out of trouble." Then he takes you to at dinner at a diner, and he's
great.
like, you do this like back and forth where you have to ask him in the very beginning multiple times like, who are you, who are you, who am I, who are you, and then finally he's like, I'm a detective, you should be a detective too, you have like some real gumption, ask me all these questions or something like that. That's right, that's how that happened.
Yeah, and so that's strange too. And then he's around for some of the game, but like in the first couple chapters, it becomes clear that he is investigating another case, which you sort of in a roundabout way also end up
Yeah,
investigating.
well, because they're like, it is really funny because he's like, the statute of limitations on this case are ending in like 2 days, so the police have like called me in to try to help.
So I'm going to be gone for
But
a
no,
lot of
it
this
ends up
stuff.
being like basically the same exact case
Yeah.
that you are doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the premise of the sort of inciting incident of the girl who stands behind the actual like meat and potatoes mystery is a high school girl has been murdered. Her name is Yoko, and she is the founder of the school's detective club. First of all, love this. I love that they're making detective club like part of the
Mm-hmm.
actual like in universe canon. It's a thing that exists inside the game Famicom Detective Club, because otherwise it's like, why do these games have this name? But so this answers that question, doing solo a Star Wars story, right? Um, and so you spend like the entire time going to her school and investigating her classmates, and but mostly the teachers and staff at the high school, which is the Ushimitsu High School.
Right. And so, and the reason it goes like parallel or combines with the case that Utsugi is investigating is because Yoko was looking into the death of a high school girl from 15 years ago.
Which is both a mystery that you will be working to solve throughout the course of this game, and is also the impetus for the titular girl who stands behind.
Right, which is a legend in this high school, kind of like a ghost story about, like you're alone at night or like late walking through the halls, nobody else is around, and a girl who had been murdered like shows up behind you.
Like covered in blood.
Covered in blood, yeah. Very
And
like Bloody Mary.
yeah, and it's like a creepy story that like the students have been telling each other. And when you start investigating it, you don't really know like the providence of this story
Yeah.
or like where it comes from or what the significance is. But it turns out all these things, just like in the first one, all of the disparate mysteries are part of one greater mystery. And I think the sort of like cascading mysteries in this one were more compelling to me than
Mm-hmm.
in the Missing Heir. Um, but so, how do you want to approach this? So, you want to talk a little bit about the Kanata case, or like your experiences at the high school at first? Because, like, yeah, I
I
don't really know how to approach.
Okay. I guess like yeah, let's start with the Kanata case. Um because that man, yeah, I
I
guess
mean, we know. Okay, so yeah, to try and like tie them together. Yoko is investigating the Kanata case, which seems to be connected to the death of Shinobu, who is presumed to be this girl that stands behind. Um, who stands behind? Sorry, I messed it up. And so she is asking around, and that's part of that's what gets her killed, is that she's asking questions about this murder case. And the original murder case is the murder of Genjiro Kanata, who is now this is another like crooked businessman, and he's doing illegal stuff,
yeah, it
right?
kind of seems like small time or maybe not small time, but kind of like mob type stuff where
Not straight
like
up yakuza, but
yeah.
like for sure involved in some like shady business practices that would like force people out of business
Mhm.
and stuff like that. So this not really gangster guy is murdered in his home, and on the same night, Shinobu went missing. This is all 15 years ago.
Yeah, and turns out that Shinobu was dating Genjiro's son,
Yeah,
uh,
Goro.
Goro,
Mhm.
and Goro's still alive, but like is not really around. Like you
Has been
can't
scarce
has
for a
been
while. Yeah.
scarce. Yeah.
So you are trying to put together the pieces of what you know about what Yoko was investigating. So the game sort of like subtly shifts to you investigating the school's connection to the Kanata case. Because there are all of these like like Shinobu was a student at the high school, um, and the evening that she went missing was the first time the girl who stands behind was ever cited by this teacher. What's her name? Um, Hamaya. Um, and so she was a student at the time, is a teacher at the school now. So you're sort of like putting together all these disparate pieces. Um, and something like comes into view where there is a wall that is patched over, and on the old school building by the janitor that night, like late at night.
Yeah, he says it was from 9 p.m. to midnight.
Yeah.
And so that's really where the cases start to intersect because
Yes.
the janitor's name is Tazaki, and he is your first like, oh, this dude did it.
Yeah.
Like at in the game. So like the first maybe like half or at least third is really focused on like figuring out what he knows and what his alibi is. But he is given an alibi from the principal
Urabe.
And Urabe like is kind of this saintly
Everyone
person.
loves this guy.
Everyone
And
loves him.
every time you ask people about him, they're like, "Oh, he's the best. What an educator, a wonderful man. I would die
he
for
really
him."
cares about the
Yeah.
students. Like he's really invested. But he also like like he is Tazaki's alibi. Like he slowly like begins to be really important
Yeah.
to like all of these different people where like he kind of is like covering for them a little bit.
Right. Well, it becomes a little bit obvious that like things trace back to him in some way just because he's so involved with everyone.
Yeah.
And again, this sort of in contrast to the missing heir, where everyone is suspicious in this because like everyone is sort of lying to you too and like has something to hide. So you're investigating to Tazaki, the janitor. Um, and I forget exactly how, but you discover that his alibi is bogus. But one of the reasons that he sticks to the alibi even when you grill him about it, and even when Yoko was grilling him about it, is because if he reveals that his alibi is made up, that puts Urabe in a bad light.
Yeah, and he had like made mistakes in his past or whatever. And so that's why he feels like cuz you go on this whole thing to like the village he grew up in.
Yeah.
And you run into Tazaki's mom, and man, do I feel for like mom Tazaki.
Oh yeah,
because
I
she's
feel
like,
for Tazaki too, though.
Yeah.
Like he's got this whole thing of like, yeah, he probably ran around with the wrong crowd for a while, but like he has clearly straightened up whatever like mischief he got into, and it was purely mischief too. Like I don't think he ever like hurt anyone.
It doesn't seem like
yeah.
it. Yeah.
He seems like a pretty good guy until these two kids are investigating him for murder. And so this is the point where Ayumi drugs you and goes out to investigate Tazaki by herself. And he does like take her to a cliff at knife point and is like, "Stop investigating me!" And you're like, "Dude, this looks bad for you."
But that's definitely the most dynamic like part of the games because you like go to his apartment. You realize that he's like gone to the village he grew up in, but Ayumi is like missing through all of this, and so you like are rushing around. You go out there, you talk to Tazaki's mom, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, what has he got himself into?" Like,
yeah, it's very cool.
He's really like cleaned, and like the stakes kind of like feel higher than they almost do at any other time in the game. And then yeah, you like go out to the cliff, which looks a lot like the suicide cliff
Okay,
from
but
the
not
missing
exactly.
Heir, but it's not the same.
It's not exactly the same clip.
But it looks very similar. To the point that initially I was like, "Is this supposed to be the same place?" It is not. But eventually, you like tackle him.
You tackle him. Tackle becomes one of the actions that you can do.
Yeah.
And if you try to do it too early, it's like, no, I need to distract him first. So you have to talk to him and then tackle him.
But that sequence is really cool. And then like Tazaki kind of like fades into the background. You will talk to him again after that, but he is clearly not a suspect after that like event.
Right. But it is cool that throughout all of this, you keep seeing that patched up wall that he did like over and over again. So it becomes this like this inconsistency or like a suspicious point in your mind for a long time.
Yeah, it's a red herring up to the very end. Except I would say for the fact that this high school at the end of a hallway has an enormous like 12-foot mirror.
Okay, well, we'll get to the mirror.
But where it's just like, okay, like the concrete wall is weird, but nobody's talking about why this high school has this mirror.
No one's talking about the mirror. And the mirror. So Ayumi has an experience at the mirror, right, where she thinks she sees Yoko, and hears, right? Is this when Yoko?
No, she did see Yoko.
Okay,
and Yoko says like the girl who stands behind is like right behind you or something like that.
Or is that when she says Shinobu is still here in the school?
I feel like the first time
Sure, okay.
at the mirror that she says like is right behind the girl who stands behind is like right behind me or right behind you or something like that. But later, yes, we find out that Yoko was telling people that Shinobu is still at the school.
Yeah, and sort of as we're investigating, we discover that Yoko is a cousin of Shinobu, which I don't really know that it's important, like how we get to that information. But we do see a portrait of Shinobu up in the art room, where the not Dr. Kanata character, whose name is Komada. So there's a portrait that is drawn of her, and he's like, oh yeah, I guess she does look exactly like Yoko. And you're like, you know more than you're letting on, you little jerk. But so it's around this time where you meet Hitomi. And not knowing Japanese names, I had no read on whether Hitomi is a traditionally male or female name, but the game like plays it like a laugh, right? Of like, oh,
yeah.
here's Hitomi. I guess it could be a boy's name too. You're like, okay, all right, cool. Hitomi's a huge weirdo.
There are lots of huge weirdo students at this school.
Yes.
Like there's one who's like you think is a tennis instructor, and
No,
then it turns
just a
out that
big
he's
student.
just like a big like adult looking student. And then Hitomi's like another one where he has so many like he kind of looks like a greaser a little bit.
Kinda.
But he's like he has a little bit of a pompadour going. But he's like a really tall dude. Turns out he seems like he's gonna be tough. But him and Yoko were like best friends, and he says that Yoko was really supportive of his dream to become the world's strongest man. There's just like throwaway lines like that are like really funny.
Yeah. And also like he shaves his eyebrows.
He shaves his
He's
eyebrows.
got no eyebrows.
But like so he was like one like a really funny character. But that's what I mean where it's like, oh yeah, the characters were like more better drawn.
Yeah.
Like in like personality
and
wise,
there's more of them. Yeah.
like because you just meet all these like side characters are kind of funny. Like there's a club promoter who is like outside of a now club.
Love the club
He
promoter.
doesn't even like really do anything that's like that like funny or interesting. But like yeah, love the club promoter. A drunk guy comes and accosts you once, and like that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Like Hitomi's great. Like there's just lots of like interesting like side characters who don't play like major roles. But like I don't actually understand what Hitomi was supposed like provided in this game.
Yeah, he's just like a bodyguard maybe. We also sort of glossed over Hibino.
Right, who is a very important character.
He's an incredibly important character, and kind of to this point, like the halfway point, we really only know him as Yoko and Ayumi's English teacher, who is also sort of a dreamboat.
He's a little bit of a dreamboat.
Like everyone says so.
He's
weird really, that you don't notice it.
Yeah. He's really crushed by Yoko's death, and his past is a little bit unclear. Like he's not from the city where everybody else is.
Yeah, that's right. And he is also like he's just kind of quieter when you although Hayama is super quiet too. Like,
yeah.
But both of these teachers that when you interview them, like just shut up. And maybe this is only in contrast to Komada, the art teacher, who is more than happy to talk your ear off about whatever. But yeah, he's like a gentle, sweet, easily crushable teacher.
Yeah. Both teachers that you interact with, like, it's very clear that they know more than they are like willing to tell you in the beginning.
There is also, did it bug you that there is another teacher who is always just
Other teacher?
He's I think he's classified as other teachers, like plural, and he's the only one ever, just like this older guy.
And he's always just sitting behind the desk.
Yeah,
And he's
at the faculty lounge.
There's a rule in the faculty lounge that a teacher always has to be in it. So
they break this rule.
They also they use Habino and Hayama. They like totally abuse it to like get out of talking to you.
Oh, totally.
Like, other teacher will walk in and they're like,
what time to
it's
go?
like that improv game of like stand, sit, lie down, where like there's 3 people in it each time. Like somebody at all times, one person has to be standing, one person has to be lying down, one person has to be sitting, and it's basically like the way that they treat the faculty lounge is the like faculty lounge equivalent of that.
Yeah,
improv
that one person that you can control someone else's actions by either entering or exiting.
Yeah, because as soon as one other person walks in,
you would
think that the rule is only one teacher can be in there.
It
at
does
a time.
seem like that. Okay, so where are we in this story? I think this is about the time when you are also seeing a mysterious older dude, not even older, but like in his 30s, hanging out with the principal, Urabe. And the students are talking about it too. The students are like, who's this weirdo?
Right, because he's always hanging around. And this is also around the time that like Urabe, I would say you're just trying to get more information on him, and everybody is like stonewalling you with nice by just being like, "Oh, he's
Totally,
great.
yeah.
Like, why are you don't have to worry about him. Like, he's awesome. What kind of car did he drive 15 years ago? Who cares? We're not talking.
Who
about
cares? Why would you even want to know?
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're doing a good. I think we are, but I don't know if we're doing a good job of like conveying how like diffuse this information is as it comes at you. Because you are sort of just like sitting in the general morass of this sort of information for hours before it starts to come into like clear focus.
And that is one thing that I think is more, and I'm hesitate to say realistic, but like more realistic than the missing heir, because the missing heir I feel like is its story is very focused. Its story is very like an onion, and just like, oh, like, okay, like I'm unpeeling it, it makes sense. Whereas the girl who stands behind, it is much more of like you're saying, like this like morass where there are like all these, there's like threads that you're following at different times, but it is very unclear like how it all will tie together.
Yeah, well, and it's sort of typified by the fact that you are investigating both this crime from 15 years ago and the murder of Yoko. And to this point, you're still just at the one death, which is pretty cool. Considering that in the missing heir, you're just their family members are getting knocked off left
day
and right.
after day.
But so you discover that the man that has been coming around the school is Goro Kaneda, the son of the murdered Genjiro Kaneda from the Kaneda case 15 years ago. And so this is when you're like, okay, the principal is connected to that case in some way. Like, I know this for sure, but it takes a long time to put like the rest of the pieces together. And I would say that it really starts to come together when you are going to Goro's regular, like the bar that he frequents. You get his address and you go to like, I'm going to ask Goro some questions, but surprised you can't because he's being stabbed to death by a fountain pen, by a man with a fountain pen.
That's really unclear to me. It is a man with a fountain pen, but I don't think he used the fountain pen to stab Goro. However, Goro has the fountain pen in his hand somehow.
Right. So maybe he just wrestled it away from him.
Yeah. Maybe the man came at him with the fountain pen. Goro grabbed the fountain pen, and so he stabbed him with like his backup knife.
Yeah, maybe. Backup knife is a great answer. But the pen has initials on it, TU. So there's a time here where you are like, okay, who
because there's a couple of people. It could be like the principal, Tadashi Urabe. Like, is it his pen? Is it like, how is this connected? to people. I do also want to interject the one thing. The teacher Hayama, who 15 years ago was a student and saw the girl who stands behind for the first
Oh
time.
yeah, tell this story. Yeah,
She was, I can't remember why, but she was like,
she was at the school
she
late
was
at
at the
night.
school late
Yep.
at night at like 10 p.m. and she looked in a window up on like the second floor, and there was a girl covered in blood standing at the window. And so
Cool stuff,
that's,
right?
yeah. And she thinks that like, oh, it could have been Shinobu, but she thinks that it was like Shinobu after she had died, after Shinobu had already been killed.
Right. And you know, truly to this point, um, we don't know that she's been murdered, right?
Right.
Like she just went missing, that night. Um, so then,
Well, okay, so
yeah,
Goro dies,
Mhm.
and that's really kind of like where everything starts to come together. Because then you're like, okay, so maybe it like really is Urabe. You kind of like narrow in on him because then that's when everybody starts coughing up the information where it's like, oh yeah, he drove a car, like a black car 15 years ago.
Oh, and
A
by the way,
black
there
car
was a
was
50.
seen,
Yeah.
yeah, like a black car was seen leaving the scene of the crime of killing like Genjiro 15 years ago.
And also, the principal at this point is missing. He's away on a business trip, which like a little weird for a high school
For
principal, right?
multiple days. But
Yeah.
then you find out that he is not where he told people he was going to be.
Right. And I think this is where we just like rip the band-aid off
Yeah.
and like reveal what the conclusion here. He is helping to protect Hibino, the dreamy English teacher, whose real name is not Hibino. He or at least he was raised as hold on, I want to make sure I get the names right here. He was raised as Tatsuya Uchida or Uchida, um, who was someone whose father either committed suicide or was like driven to financial ruin by uh, Genjiro Kaneda, right?
This is what is so confusing to me
This is tough.
because at the well, okay, let's put a pin in what is really confusing to me about
Sure.
this. Okay, so I think that Habino was born, right, like Tatsuya Uchida,
Yes.
TU.
Yes.
And then but and then he changes his name. Actually, okay.
His mother changes his name, right? Changes their name.
No, because this
His
is where
mother
I'm
is also dead.
this is where I'm really confused.
Right.
But anyways, yeah, at some point he was raised by Uchida, who was like the main suspect in the death of Genjiro.
That's right. And he killed himself.
And he killed himself, yeah, because and people assume when he killed himself that's because he was guilty
Right.
of like killing Genjiro. But and so you get a tip that Urabe, the principal, has returned to the school, and so you go to the school
By a telephone call.
Yeah.
And your character is like, that voice is familiar, but I can't quite place
can't place it. And so you go and Urabe is dead.
Yeah.
He's at his desk. He apparently has killed himself. And there's a note on the desk saying, I did it. I killed all these people. And but then
open question at this point, right?
Right.
Because then like Habino is there and sort of like let's spill the truth.
Well, he like freaks out.
Well, he's like out of his mind.
Yeah, because he's like, whoa. Like Urabe did not kill all these people. I killed all these people.
Right. And like is genuinely like screaming at you and is
Yeah.
one of the more like tense portions of this game. But yeah, he's like, it goes all the way back to the Kaneda case. I killed Genjiro Kaneda because you know, there's so many connections here.
Yeah.
He was friends with Shinobu, who was sort of like starting down, was like a good student, but then like started down a sort of like dark path and was hanging out with these criminals.
And she was dating Goru, right?
Right.
And so she was at
Goro. Yeah.
Goro, yeah. She was at Genjiro's house waiting for Goro to come home. And then Hibino killed Genjiro and
freaked out.
And then freaked out. But Shinobu like
sees
is at
him.
the house, so
Right.
sees him, and so she freaks out and she runs away.
But meanwhile, Habino has called his only friend in the world, the person who will protect him no matter what, which is of course Principal Urabe, who shows up on the scene and hits her with his car by accident.
Yeah.
So that's the like maybe he killed her, right? And what they do is they take the body back to the school so that they can hide it. And the way Habino tells the story is they're up in like the second or third floor, whatever, of the school, and she comes to. She was only knocked
Right. Where
unconscious.
Urabe's like away for a moment.
Right, Arabe's away for a moment trying to figure out where they're gonna bury this body. Um, and so Shinobu like stands kind of like staggers to the window and is like trying to get someone's attention, is like trying to get help. And that's when he takes a vase and just like smashes it over her head.
And that is when the teacher who or the student 15 years ago who becomes the teacher,
Yeah, Hamaya.
Hayama,
Hayama, yes.
that's when she sees the girl who stands behind,
Right.
who is actually Shinobu at the window trying to get her like somebody's attention.
Right. So pin in that because we got to come back to it. Or maybe actually this is the end.
Well, okay, but so Habino says that he like hits her over the head.
Yes.
Shinobu over the head with the base, and that's what like actually kills her. And Urabe did when he hit her with the car, just injured her.
Right.
And then like he like faints or something, and when he comes to, Shinobu's body is gone, is missing, and
so he never knows where the body is.
So he doesn't know where.
And
it is
this
either.
whole time you have in your head there is this plastered over wall that was newly plastered over the night of the Kanata case. Surely the body must be there. Wrong. The body is buried behind the mirror at the end of the hallway. So people who have seen the girl who stands behind are seeing the reflection of the corpse behind them, or seeing the corpse behind them in the reflection.
Is that what I guess?
I
That
think
makes
so.
sense.
I think so.
Like the actual mechanics of this don't make any sense because it's like, did Urabe put her in the wall and then erect a 12-foot mirror, and nobody was like, where did this mirror come from?
Or you just like lifted up the mirror and like put the girl behind there.
Yeah, but it's kind of a cool like.
It's a great reveal.
It's a great reveal. It's a really cool reveal
because you're standing at the end of the hallway. Habino is like chasing you.
Yeah.
And he's like throwing punches, and the game is super dynamic and like looks really great as this is happening in a very comic booky kind of way. It's not, but so he's swinging, he's throwing punches. He hits the mirror, which shatters, and you just see this corpse, this rotted skeleton, wearing like a high school girl's uniform, like leaning against the glass. Like it's horrific, cool stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. But I have
questions.
I have a lot of questions. Because
I think, by the way, these are great questions too. Like they make the end of the game more compelling and not less. I think, but go. I want to hear. I want to hear your questions.
I may just be completely misunderstanding
Mm-hmm.
okay. Actually, I agree with you on this part where it's like who actually did what, who killed who.
Yes.
Because, and I think that it is an open question. Because Habino, he says that he killed Shinobu, actually killed her by like hitting over the head, so like blunt force trauma. But then the
coroner says no.
Coroner says that they would have noted, they would have seen if she had like her skull would have been cracked or something, and that was not the case. So did Habino actually do that? Like,
so if
what
did
Urabe do, if anything, and what did Habino do? And like, is Habino telling that story to like protect Urabe after Urabe like has done so much to protect him?
And did Urabe write that letter? And
right, like did Habino kill Urabe,
or did Urabe kill himself because he only knows that like his only value is of service to his teachers.
Try to protect?
Yeah. So like that's a compelling question. But to the question of did Habino smash Shinobu over the head with a vase and kill her? If he didn't, as the coroner says, what did Hayama see?
Yeah, great question.
So like this is one where like the question about the ghost story component is not really answered. Like
unresolved.
There may in fact be a ghosty element to this still. Which is super cool because you're left with these two unreliable people. Habino, who's going nuts, and Urabe, who lies for a living to protect people. Not for a living, but he does it. He does it a lot, and then is dead.
The part that is so confusing to me,
yeah,
and I don't like. I feel like maybe I am misunderstanding something. Is that the game, like the story resolves itself. You find out it's Hibino who did it. Um, oh man, why am I blinking on Aoyumi, the girl who like becomes part of the detective club, like officially becomes part of the detective agency, leading into there is like a direct lead in to the missing heir, where it's like you get a phone call and it's like, what, you want me to like go out to this family estate
Yeah,
to like
yeah.
investigate this murder? But and then Utsugi takes Ayumi out to dinner and you get left behind, or like kind of like comically, I guess, a little bit. And then the screen goes to black, and then there's this weird little epilogue where it's like, "Hey, by the way, about the pen that said TU
Yes.
on it." And the part that's so confusing to me is it has this like crazy info dump where you're like, "Wait, what?" Where it turns out that Habino is Urabe's son, but after Urabe's wife died, he entrusted Hibino to his friend the Uchidas.
That's right.
So, okay, but also that seems like super critical information, like,
Yeah,
or at
yeah,
least
yeah.
like information that seems pretty integral to the story.
I mean, it sort of does in that, like, it explains why he would be so protective of Hibino. But yeah, I
It's
mean,
a weird postscript.
it is
It's a
definitely
weird
a weird
postscript to
postscript
like not like
and maybe unnecessary.
explain that relationship. I mean, I guess it resolves the mystery of like why it says TU on the pen that Goro
Yeah, sure.
had like when he died. And so it almost feels like it it almost feels like they like made the game and were like, "Oh crap, we didn't explain the pen. Like here's a weird
And
postscript."
someone else in the writers' room was like, "No, we explained it, right? We did." Like, no, man, go back and look. We did not explain it, never once.
So they're like, "Oh, by the way, like Urabe, it was Sabino's dad,"
Uh,
and that just feels like critical information
yeah, yeah,
that would have made sense earlier in the game, or like even at that conclusion, and just feels weird as like a postscript.
yeah. I agree with that. And then after that postscript, the game then gives you like it analyzes your personality
That's really funny.
based on
Yeah,
how you played the game. And I don't know about you, Mark, but like a lot of me playing this game is just like, cycling through all of the options. Like I don't any sort of judgment on my personality feels dubious at best. But I did take pictures of
Oh,
my
nice.
personality readout. Hold on, let me grab my phone.
I did not think to take pictures of it, but I can tell you because in addition to the personality test, there's also a compatibility test with Ayumi where it's like there's out of 20 hearts to
Yeah,
tell you
yeah,
like
yeah,
how
yeah.
compatible you are.
How
And
compatible were
I
you
can
with
tell you I
Ayumi?
did not do well on that. I think I got like less than 10 hearts. And so like a random student who you meet in the art room earlier in the game, like I kind of berated me, so I don't know if it's trying to tell me that like that's who I fell in love with or like that's who I'm compatible with.
Yeah, you fall in love with who berates you. Um, yeah, I got just one line of hearts, so 10 hearts.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't know what
I don't
to
know
compare
either.
that
Like
to or how you.
I looked it up briefly, and it seemed like doing things like not showing her Yoko's ID to upset her, like that kind of stuff, like
Mm.
had an effect.
So here's my personality. According to Famicom Detective Club, the girl who stands behind. You are somewhat composed, but you also seem to have a kind side. You're thought of as a considerate person, especially when dealing with those who are less fortunate than you. You can be a bit rash and careless, can't you? You seem like a very focused person.
Oh,
So that's how I played this
yeah.
game.
I wonder what like choices like affected that.
Yeah, I don't know. And it would be interesting to like have that information or whatever, but like as it is, it's just sort of a weird thing you encounter and you're like, "Oh, all right, cool, thanks game."
Yeah,
Um and it's weird that it's not a feature of the first game.
but I guess it makes sense. Like it or makes sense in the sense that it's a sequel and it's just
Sure, and
like
they're
a
adding
little like
features, yeah.
thing that they're adding. It adds replayability, right? Which like the missing air, once you
Yeah,
know
totally.
the story, there's no real reason to go back and play it again. Versus this game, it's like, oh yeah, maybe like I want to figure out how I make Ayumi and me like a perfect match.
Yeah, but I mean the game is both these games are so like obtuse that like there are a lot of times where like it would be a folly to pretend that like I know how one action like leads to another
Totally,
result,
totally, yeah.
Um but so those are the two games, The Missing Heir and The Girl Who Stands Behind. Um Mark, what did you think of these games?
I really enjoyed myself. I enjoyed The Missing Heir more than I liked The Girl Who Stands Behind. Part of that maybe is just because like The Missing Heir I went in with like low expectations because it's like, oh, it's a game from like the 80s,
Yeah.
like how good of a mystery can it actually be? And I found myself like really compelled by it. And so I think like going into The Girl Who Stands Behind, I almost had higher expectations. And so it was a little bit harder
Sure, I
to
could see
like
that.
live up to that, I guess. But overall, I really liked it. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, same conclusion overall. I really liked both these games. I think I liked the second one better. The Missing Heir. I do think that it does sort of sand down some of like the weird circles that you can get yourself caught in, especially early on. Like I think it is just an easier game to play in the early go. Still has its frustrating moments. Um, but mostly playing these games, like it just made me wish that there was a modern entry in this series where like where just the investigation felt more like interactive or like they're just written so well and
Yeah.
like the stories are sketched so well that like I just want a new one of them.
But I imagine that there are a lot of adventure games out
Probably,
there that
probably.
like would kind of fit this mold. But I do think that there's a fine line between like what I want from like a visual novel and like an adventure game. And I think for me, like I want that like adventure game part of it where even if it is very guided, I have a little more agency than in a visual novel, which is exactly what it, sounds like, which is pretty much you're just
Yeah.
like experiencing the story, but you're not really like up figuring it out even in the loose, like light way that you do in this game.
These games do ask you from time to time to like not intuit, but like actually say the answer to mysteries. And in The Missing Heir, it's you type it out, and in The Girl Who Stands Behind, you select characters from like a list of characters.
Yeah, and typing it out, boo to
Boo
that
to
in the
typing
missing
it.
hair. So it was like, uh, yeah, I had to like look up character names, which okay, like to get the spelling exactly right, which is not a problem, except that there's no way to like once you enter that state where you have to enter a name,
There's no way to pull up your
there's no
notebook.
way to
Yeah.
like pull up your notebook, so you just have to like Google it.
But I think that's cool. And if there were more parts of that where like it, where the game wasn't just like, so now we've discovered that this person's the killer, where it's like, oh no, it's like if it just prompted me a couple more times,
Yeah,
I feel like that would be enough to make me feel like I was genuinely like interacting with it. But yeah, I like these games a lot. I don't know if they're worth a $60 price tag necessarily, but like I don't know, I played with them as much as I would want to play with like a new Nintendo title, right? Like I
yeah,
probably got like 12, 14,
yeah.
15
Because
hours out
I
of
I
it.
think each one probably took me between 6 and 10 hours,
Yeah.
and so it felt like long enough. Each is like 11 chapters. Um, I do we do have like an email, right, from one of our
Yeah,
listeners.
sorry.
But
Sorry, I
no,
forgot.
no, no. But
Yes.
like, while you're pulling that up, I teased on Tuesday like a connection with Metroid Other M,
Oh,
and that
yes.
is of course that the writer of both of these games is Yoshio Sakamoto, who was also like the director of Super Metroid and has kind of become like the um producer for the Metroid series. Like he leads the Metroid series, and in Metroid Other M, there is I don't remember if you remember when we did our playthrough, but there's a section where you're like, um, it's not really outside because you're still in the space station, but it seems like a simulated like field, and the game like asks you to like find something that is like wrong,
Yes. Oh
and it
my
ends up being
god.
like a lizard tail or something like that that's kind of
Yes.
like hidden in
I
the
do
bushes.
remember this.
But the punishing kind of like moments in The Missing Heir, and there's a similar ones in The Girl Who Stands Behind, where you just have to like look and click around on every object until
Yeah.
it like makes the connection it wants you to make. Reminded me so much of that like pixel hunting in
Yeah.
Metroid Other
Totally.
M
Totally.
that I was like, look, I know that Sakamoto didn't direct these Famicom Detective Club games or didn't produce them. He was just the scenario writer.
Yeah, but it was in the air.
It seems like when that was happening, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a mechanic he loves and wanted to bring back.
Yeah, and I mean to that point, and those things that you will encounter while playing these games, if you choose to, after we spoiled
I know.
the whole game.
We almost should go back and at the beginning to say like, hey, you should play these, and now we're gonna spoil the whole thing.
That's a great point. We did a bad job. But I think they would even be fun to experience anyway, even knowing, because again, like we.
I cannot imagine that our explanations made very much sense.
Great point.
So I think it'll still be like experiencing these games for new.
And also, like, please have a walkthrough handy.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And just consult it anytime you're stuck, because like it's fine. You're missing some convoluted thing that you were never going to figure out anyway, and do not worry about it. So our email about Famicom Detective Club comes from Chariot Goblin, who writes, "Hey NCS crew, I've completed both Famicom Detective Club games. I started with The Missing Heir and then went on to The Girl Who Stands Behind. I think both these games are great and represent an era of weird Nintendo that seems to be lacking these days. These remakes being localized feels like a miracle. I feel that The Girl Who Stands Behind is definitely the better of the two in terms of cinematics, atmosphere, music, and quality of life gameplay. The story was definitely more predictable than The Missing Heir, but that's interesting. And it may have the darkest ending in all Nintendo game history. I also had less trouble progressing in The Girl Who Stands Behind. Also, Ayumi for Smash, and hopefully they remake and localize that third game. Sorry for the long email, and keep up the great work, Chariot Goblin." That is not a long email. Thank you for writing it. Good to man. Yeah, we're never gonna get that third, the Satellaview.
No,
game, right?
It doesn't seem like it. Although, Cherry Goblin's email makes me think, Patrick, do you have, because The Girl Who Stands Behind is like a prequel,
yeah,
would you recommend that people play The Girl Who Stands Behind first or The Missing Heir first?
I am always in situations like this going to say release order.
Yeah, same.
Missing Heir, and then because Missing Heir is also one of the mysteries is you don't know who you are.
Yeah.
So like that's play that game and then play The Girl Who Stands Behind.
I think they're yeah, I agree. I think they're definitely meant to be played that way, even if like the story in the Famicom Detective Club universe like happens to have The Girl Who Stands Behind first. If somebody was only going to play one of these games,
this is a great question.
Which one would you recommend? Because I, at this moment, do not necessarily have like one that I'd pick over the other.
Me neither. I think Chariot Goblin is in line with my thoughts are in line with Chariot Goblin. And if you were only playing one, I would probably say The Girl Who Stands Behind. But if you're gonna if this is something that you're gonna get into, I say just play them both. Like if you want to play these games, they're fun games.
Yeah, and again, it's only like 20 hours, so it's not like a huge time commitment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with that. I think you're right that I would probably recommend The Girl Who Stands Behind, just because the characters are a little bit more fun.
Yeah.
Like the world has a little more flavor. Although for me, The Missing Heir I found to be a more like compelling story.
Yeah. So again, we've put our recommendations here after an hour and a half of spoiling the plots of both these games. Mark, let's close out our discussion. Okay, that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts. If you like the episode, please share it on Facebook or Twitter, or with your friends who just want to know about Famicom Detective Club. If they've ever even heard of it. This feels so small, doesn't it? Like in the realm of like what people are talking about in Nintendo, like
yeah, I think so.
The footprint's so small.
I mean, I think just like adventure games, that's a small slice, and then like retro adventure games, like an even smaller slice. But yeah, for sure, it doesn't feel like there's a ton of conversation around it.
Right. So we're here having all the conversation about it. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Nincart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Eller saying thank you for listening.
Mia. Hey, it's Allie. And we host the Rom-Com Review podcast, P.S. I Love Rom-Coms. Each week, we'll have incredible guests come and discuss a new rom-com, grand gestures, meet-cutes, and of course, that elusive chemistry. Mia, what are you doing holding that giant boombox over your head? I'm hoping to win over listeners with this grand gesture. Take us back! Find a new episode every week. And subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Brought to you by Campfire Media. Wow, you're still holding that boombox.
Yeah, I've got great upper body strength. Thanks, CrossFit.
P.S. I love rom-coms.
Campfire.